Howdy folks, still here at Color, and I'm lucky enough to be with a good friend of mine, Glenn Fawcett, who's the president of Black Hills Winery. Glenn, thank you so much for making the time today.
Christoph, an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Glenn, I've been talking with a lot of people about how this vintage, as much if not more than any other vintage, has been an emotional roller coaster for the farmers, for the grape growers, for everybody who's working in the vineyard. And maybe you could just speak to that a little bit about what it's been like for Black Hills.
Well, it definitely has been a roller coaster and a very exciting year. We started off with an incredibly mild winter leading into early bud burst in our vineyard. So we started the grapes going 2 to 3 weeks earlier than normal. Right. And then the weather throughout the spring and throughout the summer became so incredibly warm that in our Cabernet Sauvignon, which is the backbone of our Nota Bene flagship, right, just started taking off. The growth of the vines and the ripeness of the clusters just came together much earlier than we've ever seen before in the 20-year history of our vineyard. Right. And there was a time we were concerned that maybe it was ripening too quickly. We're getting the chemical ripeness prior to the phenolic ripeness and all the flavors coming together. But fortunately, as we got into early September, the evenings started to become cooler again, and the acidity was starting to be retained within the grapes as opposed to falling out, as it can happen once you go post-foraison on the grapes. So we're really, really happy the way that the weather patterns came together, and so all that intense heat mean that any pyrazines or any greenness that may exist in Cabernet Sauvignon on a cooler vintage is completely non-existent in this 2015 year.
Now, you guys are a little bit further south in the valley, so were you guys worried about the smoke that was coming up from Washington State?
I believe everybody had concerns in regards to the smoke. So whether it's the Washington State or some of the smoke drifting in from the Testa Linden fire, another fire north of Oliver, there was concerns with that. By and large, most of the smoke was fairly high elevation. Wasn't spending a lot of sustained time in the bottom of the valley. The one from Washington State, when it came in though, it was all throughout the valley. Right. So we had some concerns about what possible impact it might have. In particular, post-raison, the grapes' skins become more permeable and potentially susceptible to that. Right. But fortunately, so far, and knock on wood, we haven't been able to detect any of the smoke taint within our grapes. Right. Now we're all the way through our whites. We picked our Sauvignon Blanc, we picked our Semillon, we picked our Muscat, we're on to our Viognier. We have not yet been able to detect any elements of that smoke taint. We're on to Merlot, so good so far, and hoping that that'll see its way through the rest of the fall. So I know it's a concern that's shared by a lot of the winemakers. So far, we don't think it's an issue, but we'll be prepared for strategies if we do need to deal with it.
Quick question, just to wrap up. Wondering, do you think that this is going to be one of those vintages where we're celebrating this vintage 15 years from now, 20 years from now, 25 years from now?
Well, Christoph, it's a beautiful lead-in for what is one of the known facts in Wine Marketing 101. The best vintage ever is the one you're selling. And sort of addressing your question specifically is that we do think, particularly...
He's saying, yes, absolutely, buy it all, it's amazing.
But the truth of it is that because Cabernet Sauvignon is the backbone of our Nota Bene, and Nota Bene is our flagship, and the one we put the most effort and time into, is that knowing that we have the full ripeness in those grapes, we're extremely excited. So our winemaker, Graham Pierce, who's a gift, a fantastic palate, he's not one to get up on a soapbox and make proclamations in advance, but I know he's been getting excited with what he's seen in the Cabernet Sauvignon, as well as the Merlot and Cabernet Franc, so we're feeling extremely excited about what's going to come this year, but we're not going to be so bold to say vintage of the century. Lots of others saying that, but we're stoked.
But he's saying that if this was Margaux, we'd be saying, yes, absolutely, vintage of the decade, and we're going to charge you 30% extra. Lucky enough for us, we're Canadian, we're not so inclined. We're not so inclined. Glenn, thank you so much for making the time, my friend.
Christoph, you're welcome, and thanks.
Howdy, folks. Just about to taste the famous Black Hills Nota Bene, the flagship, of course, of Black Hills Winery. This is the wine that became the biggest cult hit ever in BC wine. One vintage, this wine sold its entire allotment online in less than 50 minutes. 3,000 cases in 50 minutes. It's, I'm sure, something that somebody in California has done more than once or twice, but in Canada, something pretty extraordinary. So here's the wine. You can see it in the glass. It's deep, it's dark, it's inky. And when I smell Nota Bene, I in fact never think BC. I think left bank Bordeaux. I think absolutely top Haut Médoc, or maybe even a small, less-known house in Margaux. It's not quite the same kind of pencil shaving minerality, but the ripeness of fruit, the layering of textures and aromas, absolutely the same. You know what? If anything, it in fact tastes more like one of the better houses from Chile, somebody like L'Apostol. And I mean that as the greatest of all possible compliments. On the palate, absolutely the same. It's layered, it's textured. It has a brightness to the acidity that in fact is much more like great cool vintage Bordeaux. So if Bordeaux's your thing, you gotta try this. I give this vintage, which I believe is the 2013 that they're pouring today, I give this 92 plus points, and at $45, $65, my apologies. At $65 for a 92 plus point Bordeaux blend, absolutely excellent value, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I. Howdy folks, Chef Christoph still here at Color, and I'm lucky enough to be here with a good friend of mine, Larry Gorillaz from Stag's Hollow Winery. Larry, thank you so much for making the time to be with me today.
Well, thank you for having me talk about the vintage.
And thanks for the lead-in, because that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. Obviously, every year is a bit of a roller coaster, but I really wanted to hear from you what made this vintage special, unique for you, emotional, and how have you dealt with the roller coaster at Stag's Hollow?
Well, of course, it started off with a very, very early spring, and knowing that it was going to be a very early spring, what you wind up getting is bud burst a little too early, and then there's always the potential for frost. So the first thing you start to worry about is the grapes potentially having a frost issue and destroying buds on you. We got by that quite nicely, and I think most people in the valley did. So that was a big positive, and now we knew from then on that it was going to potentially be one of the earlier vintages we've had, and I've been around for 20 years experiencing them.
So we've talked a lot about the challenges with the vintage and the emotional roller coaster this year, but there's got to be some highs with the lows. So tell me now something beautiful that's happened in your vineyard this year.
Well, actually, there's a couple of things about the smoke that was interesting. It was a negative, but because the smoke came in, it sort of knocked the sun. It was like a cloud cover, and it actually cooled the valley down a bit and slowed the vintage down. And then, of course, we had that rain come in, the clouds come in for a little while in August, and that helped slow things down. So the smoke to some degree was a bit of a positive. And then I think the change in weather really helped slow the vintage down, which is very, very positive. But from our perspective, because it started so early, what it allowed us to experience, from my perspective, was I'm really excited about how our Tempranillo is going to develop this year, because it's finally going to happen.
No, sorry, Larry, I have to interrupt. You said Tempranillo from BC? Well, that's impossible. Canadians can't grow Tempranillo, can they?
They don't know Stag's Hollow Tempranillo, but yes, we can. And in my view, it's a beautiful grape. What's really interesting is that our Tempranillo goes into Veraison before Pinot Noir does, year after year.
That's crazy.
It just takes a little longer to ripen, and it needs a little more heat. So yeah, I'm very excited about our Tempranillo this year.
Well, Larry, thank you so much for making the time to speak with me today, and thanks for sharing a bit of your story.
Thank you very much.
Howdy, folks. Wanted to taste one more wine with you guys before we wrap up Color, the largest tasting of BC wines in the province. It's that Tempranillo that Larry Gorillaz from Stag's Hollow was telling you about. Pretty extraordinary, right? I mean, you think about it. Tempranillo coming from British Columbia, of all places. But look at this in the glass. Look at that. That's amazing. This stuff seriously looks like Spain in a glass. And on the nose, it's all tones of warm leather, forest floor, dark cocoa, brambleberry. Brambleberry is just, if you're not familiar with it, it's an expression that means a mix of dark berries. So blueberry, blackberry, black raspberry, that sort of thing. And hot damn. On the palate, it's stunning. It's got a brightness and a tenseness to the acid that's really extraordinary. It conveys all of those bright raspberry and raspberry leaf tones. It's got a concentration that continues to evolve on the palate, and the tannin structure is superb. It's got a heft to it, right? It's got a bit of a chew, and yet it's so smooth and integrated that all you want to do is just savor it, right? You all know that I'm a cigar smoker. This, fantastic with cigars. If you have to forego the cigars and have food, braised meats will delight in this. Ossobuco, anyone? Yes, I absolutely think so. So this is the Cache Tempranillo from Stag's Hollow Winery. I hope you give it a try. I'm giving this 92 points, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Well, here we come to the end of the article, and when I started things, I really thought that I wanted you, the viewer, to understand the 2015 vintage in British Columbia and understand the wineries, understand the winemakers and what they went through. And now, having interviewed far more people than I could have fit into this article, I realize that's not true. That I don't care whether or not you understand the winemakers, and I don't care whether or not you understand the wineries. What I really hope for is that from this, you understand a little bit better about the farmers. Because at the heart of it, that's the essence of the great winemakers, of the best wineries, is they're all farmers. They are all connected to the earth in a very primitive, very real way. The earth, the soil, the wind, the rain, the sun, all of it on a daily basis. And I think sometimes we as consumers forget that. We forget that wine is not created in a laboratory, it's not created in a factory, it's created in a vineyard. It's created on a farm. And so when you're tasting through the 2015 release, when it comes out, I hope that you remember what these farmers went through. I hope you remember that it was an early spring, and the farmers worried that a frost was going to come along and destroy their crop before it ever even really started. And then as they were having a beautiful summer, lightning strikes happened. And they worried that their crop would literally go up in flames. And then they worried that smoke would destroy any value that their crop might have. So it was not an easy 2015. But as perhaps John Skinner said it best, it never is. There's always something. And that's what these people go through. This is their work, this is their life. And all they're hoping for is that somehow the work that they're doing will translate into the bottle and into the glass, and you sitting at home or in a restaurant will taste something of that very precious little place that they are stewarding. And thegrape.com. Engage with me on Twitter at @astudentofwine, and of course, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to these videos, these and plenty more, on YouTube /Christophe Gillese, Kristof Gillese. Thank you for making the time to watch this video article. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I.